Is it on? We shall commence in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes and counting. Welcome, everybody. It's a rainy day here in South Carolina. It's unusually and abnormally cold, but we are all gathering together to bring warmth into everybody's hearts tonight. Blah, 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 blah. Turn to Matthew 7, verse 1. The good news is we're only going to cover 14 verses tonight. The bad news is it's still going to take me a long time. And we're going to talk about some very difficult scriptures, as if they've all been easy up to this point. So anyway, shortly. How's everybody doing?
Terrific.
Staying warm?
Not too warm, sort of warm. We needed the rain.
We do. We did. We got a lot last night too.
Absolutely.
I did a thing for my buddy in Pittsburgh. He's retiring this Sunday, and so Anita took some tape and sent it up so they're going to play it in his retirement service. And so I'm looking forward to his response. It was like a semi-roast. Would you imagine me being like that? His name is Chris Taylor. Chris Taylor is a great friend of mine. Chris, congratulations for your retirement and 40 years in the ministry. So he's done a wonderful job. Chris is my fellow walker on the Camino de Santiago. And we will be rejoining that road, that Camino, in October and doing another 115 miles. So where there'll be 7 of us all together. Anita will be sharing that this time with me. Hopefully there won't be any more hurricanes to disrupt, I should say, what I tried to do in 2019. So let's begin. Matthew 7. So far, we've covered a series of twos, right? You think about it. Last week, 2 treasures, 2 eyes, 2 lords or 2 masters, and then 2 anxieties. We continue to look at 2 opposing things again this week in juxtaposition, and actually, we're going to look at 2 judgments: how you judge and how you do not, and then even more difficult, 2 gates. The wide gate versus the narrow gate. But we're going to begin in Matthew 7:1, the most misunderstood verse possibly in the entire New Testament, if not the whole Bible. Judge not, so you won't be judged. Now, some people take this as a universal admonition that you could never make a judgment on anything. This is is not what Jesus meant. All right, so we're going to tear it apart and see what it means. So let me start by saying in verse 1, what this verse does not mean. Number 1, it does not eliminate the need for the judicial system. All right, some say, well, we don't have to have judgments then. 2, it does not mean we suspend all critical evaluation. All right, number 3, it doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye to negative or malevolent behavior. All right? We are called to judge behavior, or we wouldn't have been given the 10 Commandments. We wouldn't have been given any prohibitions in the Scriptures. So we have to look at this more carefully. What does it mean, however? It means you ain't the judge. All right? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. The ultimate judge is the Lord. What does it mean? It means you don't judge, especially when you don't have all the facts. All right, I had a friend once that told me at the beginning of my ministry, he says, Ralph, don't ever And I just heard a song from Elvis Presley, "The Fools Don't Rush In." All right? And fools rush in. You make up your mind without knowing the whole facts and the whole case. Secondly, don't be harsh without, and don't be a harsh critic without corresponding mercy. And we know that one of the Beatitudes tells us to be merciful. Don't assume to know you know God's mind or the motivations of other people. You don't know their heart. You don't know what was the context. So all that comes in there. So we have to leave room for what are people's motives. Matter of fact, Matthew 5 says, if you remember that, he said, whoever says to his brother, remember that? You dummy, raka, or it's actually the word stupid. Is that what you're doing is you're questioning somebody's mental competence. All right? He says you never say to somebody, you fool, because then you're judging their moral competence. All right? So, in other words, it begins by the assumption that Jesus has already told us this stuff earlier in chapter 5, verse 22, that we need to be careful what we say of other people. Because usually judgments are articulated in language, obviously. So, in other words, put a guard on your mouth. I gave somebody I know a scripture, Psalm 141:3. I can't remember who I gave that to. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. Verse 1. For in the way you judge, verse 2, you will be judged. And by what measure you apply to another person, says Jesus, that measure will be right back at you, buddy. So if you're critical people, they're going to be critical of you. If you're going to judge somebody too harshly, they're going to judge you harshly. All right? For the way you judged, you will be judged. All right? So whatever level of judgment we apply will come right back at us. Because whatever standard of measure, whatever your yardstick, the way you measure somebody, that person is eventually going to do the same. That's why it says, be merciful, and you will receive mercy. All right? And so that's a balancing of this idea of judgment. If you're highly critical, if you're highly exacting, people will turn it on us and measure us by the same critical eye. If we are perfectionistically judgmental of other people, they will perfectionistically judge you as well. So is Jesus saying in your mind that we don't judge at all? What is he saying? Don't judge harshly or unfairly. I think so. I think clearly that, and we'll see that even more as we go through the rest of it's 7, 1-5. I think the key here is verse 3. In verse 3, if you say, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and ignore the log that is in yours? All judgment presupposes, the way Jesus understands it and the way he's teaching it here, it presupposes self-judgment. You better look at your own heart first before you try to analyze somebody else's. You better look at your own behavior first before you become critical of somebody else's behavior. So self-evaluation is necessary, Jesus says, because your perspective, when you look at it, if you have a sawdust in your eye, what does it look like? It looks like a log because of where it is, because of your perspective. So your perspective of judging people is already clouded or impaired because you might do the same thing. Think about how many times you criticize somebody and you ask yourself, am I capable of doing that? Number 1. 2, have I ever done it before? And 3, oh my gosh, I just did it. Because when you do it, you'll be reminded of, oh my gosh, I judged Francis for saying that last week, and here I am doing the same thing. So Jesus cautions us to be careful, because whatever standard of measure, you actually are going to measure yourself eventually. All right, so verse 3, sawdust is another word for particles of judgment in people's eyes. Sawdust from our own limited self-protective or defensive perspective. Most people I know, and I don't know if I've ever met somebody who's totally non-defensive. Have you ever met anybody who could be totally non-defensive? You could attack them and they'll take it without getting defensive or try to defend their position. Can you think of anyone? I can't. All of us have this almost survival of the fittest thing. When you go after me, right away I try to think, well, if you're going to go after my jugular, I'm going to go after yours. All right. Now, there's relative standards to that. There are people that have learned to be more non-reactive than others. Some people are very reactive, and you can't even tell them that you looked at them wrong without them, going off the reservation. I wrote down, our problems often seem less weighty than others. We have a tendency to underestimate the gravity or the log in our own eye, our own faults or criticism, and overestimate others. We are expert at spotting specks in other brothers' eyes, and we downplay the log that is blinding us to self-examination. It's called the critical eye. So what I think Jesus is trying to do, he's not saying, and this is why this verse is important. He's not saying we don't make judgments. You have to. You don't ignore the fact you see somebody getting beat up and you say that behavior is not wrong and not called 9/11, right? Right? You would do that because that's the right thing to do. So there is times you have to judge people's behavior. But he's talking more, I think, in personal relationships here. And how many times we put people in a box because have you ever met somebody, I won't say who, and it's not Tom. And, and at first I just thought, I just don't think I'm ever going to like you. And what I realized is he was really smart. And I thought he was showing me up a little bit. So right away, I felt the competition between, I don't think I'm an alpha male, but I mean, I can serve like one once in a while. Anyway, so we do get into making judgments without the information behind it or without getting to know people. And Jesus is telling us, slow the train down. Don't rush to judgment. It's a matter of perspective. Our specks, from our vantage point, serve as logs, blocking our ability to see people as they really are. All right, so if we look at verse 4, he says, or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? Again, clean up your own act first before you try to clean up somebody else's. The log of fault finding without practicing self-evaluation or self-criticism leads to a critical spirit. And a critical spirit's hard to get rid of, by the way. Once you start making judgments freely, it kind of grows in you. You know what? Some of you end up having a hard heart. You can always find things wrong. I mean, as good as Anita is, I can find things wrong with her. You want me to tell you? And I think that's what happens in marriages is you start building up a reservoir of logs in your eye. You see their specks. I told her I'm marrying a couple in a couple of weeks, and I said to them, an introvert meets an extrovert, and that extrovert draws that introvert out. Oh, he's so charming, and this, and then 10 years into the marriage, she wants to say, shut up for once. So anyway, our assumption about other people's behavior is dictated by the log in our own eye. Just like somebody said to me years ago, our universe is wherever we sit. Our universe starts wherever we sit. We're the center of our universe. So we're going to see everybody according to us. And so that's why we need God, because only God can reverse that. If not, you're going to be on the wide road, and we'll get to that later. All right, so verse 5, he says, hypocrite, or the word I like is play actor. All right, you who act out. First, practice self is important. First, take that log out of your own eye. And again, he's re-emphasizing the point. You better look at your own heart first before you judge, somebody else, or your own motives before you judge. We don't judge motives. You never know. You can't read in it. You might guess, but you'll never know for sure why people do things, or why people do the things they are. I mean, we have to be careful. Maybe it's not a universe never, but we've got to be very careful of judging why people do things rather than what they do. All right. This doesn't say never judge or make critical decisions about bad behavior. Just don't judge with a critical spirit or without first applying it to yourself. Henry Nouwen wrote this: only wounded healers have the right to heal. The best counselors are the ones that have gone through the mud as well, have gone through the hurt. The best person who you'll learn not to be real judgmental if you've been judgmental it's hurt you many times. Perfectionists are sometimes the worst judges. They want you to be as like them. They want everything in order and structured and do it like the. In other words, they want you to do everything the way they want it done. And so if you're married to one, good luck. All right. Now, verse 6, let's move on, because verse 6 stands alone in a lot of people's mind. Interpretations of this very unusual voice, and verse, I should say, and one of them seems to be a corrective to do not judge. All right. In other words, it implies sometimes we are to speak critically. That is not appropriate to say. In other words, the opposite of do not judge is live and let live. Just do whatever you want. Just be free. That's true love, peace, love. Woodstock. I've been there. I remember somebody did that to me in college years and years ago, and I wanted to puke. Anyway. Don't give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before the swine. All right, what does he mean by this? All right, he's not saying we never judge. Matthew 18, somebody offends you, you go to them. If they don't listen, you take an elder with you. Then in the 30s, you take it to the church. In the Presbyterian system, it's to the session. There is a order of dealing with when people offend you. All right. So 2, in context with Matthew 7, 1 through 5, it's a continuation of admonishing disciples not to possess an unduly critical spirit. All right. What does that mean? Like throwing pearls, Christian professions, before pigs. Here's what I think it means. Be self-critical of what pearls that you throw before. In other words, have you ever tried to talk to somebody who's had too much to drink? Have you ever tried to be rational with somebody who's drunk? It's best to put them to bed and talk to them tomorrow, all right? So I think casting...
Yeah, you're back.
I'm back. Am I back?
Yeah, you're on.
You missed half the Bible study. Where were you? I'll try not to move around. We think it's the cord. Anyway... we're going to throw in some money and get something better next time. All right. Third, I really believe that's what this means in verse 6. It's an admonition for discernment. If people aren't in a place to hear the truth about themselves or the truth about God, maybe it's better not to say anything at all. Don't throw anything to the swine or to the holy. Don't give them things that they're going to reject, because they're going to turn it around on you and tear you to pieces at the end of the chapter. Like I said, sometimes it's better.
Yeah, you're back. Now you're back.
Sometimes it's...
It's weather.
It's probably the weather. So on one hand, verses 7, 1 through 5 is make critical judgments, but make them carefully. In verse 6, it's saying sometimes you don't make them at all. So, or sometimes you don't take something that is sacred, something that is holy, and try to explain it to somebody who is saying, Jesus is just a myth, or Jesus is just, he was this or that. I mean, and you could tell that they are radically opposed to hearing anything you have to say. All right, that's why I use the drunk situation. You ever try to tell a drunk not to give up the keys? All right. now, oh no, I'll be fine, I can drive. So I think it's a very